What is going on, everyone? Welcome to Big Time Football Talk. So I wanted to talk Lions draft. We just wrapped up with the draft. So let's talk Lions. Let's talk about some of the picks they made in this draft. So round one, I touched on these guys a little bit. Round one, they took Jahmyr Gibbs, running back from Alabama. Man, Jahmyr Gibbs, a lot of people thought he was in the same tier as Bijan Robinson. You know, I'll go as far to say that. This is a guy with a lot of upside. We're talking about elite speed at the running back position, 4.36, and that is on full display, especially like I touched on in the Arkansas game. You saw him really break some big runs in that game. This guy that's explosive when he gets in the open field, really good out the backfield, just a phenomenal football player, and really nice. It was a really nice piece of the Alabama offense this past year. He's going to be really fun to watch behind the Lions offensive line this year. Just this is a guy that the ability to make the first man miss is just incredible, and behind this offensive line, he's going to be a real threat. So with the pick 18, they went Jack Campbell, linebacker out of Iowa. Campbell, a guy that, like I touched on, reads plays very well, and this is a guy that's just a rock solid linebacker. Really, no weakness to this guy's game. A guy that just flies around. Very good in coverage as well. You know, teams did not get a lot of yards, throwing near Jack Campbell's area. And then round two, pick 34, they took Sam Laporta. I really think Sam Laporta is one of the more underrated players in this draft. Another guy, no weakness to this game, just a rock solid football player, jack of all trades, as some would refer to him as. A guy that can make contested catches, good jumping ability, just a really rock solid athlete, and he's faster than people think. 4.59 at the combine, definitely plays fast too. And you see his speed and acceleration in the open field. So yeah, Sam Laporta, a really good football player, that tight end out of Iowa. With the 45th overall pick in the second round, they took Brian Branch, the safety corner out of Alabama. Brian Branch, just another really all-around good football player. Talked about playing for Nick Saban. He said Nick Saban had a kind of a plan mapped out for him to have success at Alabama, and whatever that plan was, he followed it, because this was a guy that was just making plays everywhere. I mean, he can blitz. He can play the deep middle. They even lined him up at outside corner. Even Brad Holmes said, if you look up Brian Branch, next to his name, it's just football player in black and white letters. That's just what kind of a dude Brian Branch is. Seems like he's an alpha. Seems like he's an alpha competitor, I should say, and a guy that just gets after it. Looks like he enjoys and has fun playing football too, which is big. And I think he's a good culture fit for Dan Campbell, Brad Holmes, and what this Lions organization is trying to do. Third pick, 88, they took Hendon Hooker, quarterback out of Tennessee. Hendon Hooker, some people believe was going to go 12th overall. Lions take a flyer here in the third round on him. Hendon Hooker, a guy that really strong arm. The ball just really can fly out of the dude's hand. Has shown to be an effective deep ball thrower. And, when I go back and watch his tape from this past season, I really appreciate what he did, and was a guy that was right there in the Heisman discussion. A guy that I think does have a pretty high upside, and could be, you never know. This could be the best quarterback in this draft when it's all said and done. Lions take quarterback Hendon Hooker. I'll reiterate once again with the 88th overall pick in the third round. 68th overall pick, third round, they took Hendon Hooker. Third round pick, 96, they took Broderick Martin, big defensive tackle, Western Kentucky. And I'll say this as a little kind of preview. You can tell that the Lions scouting department is very good, because I think they're on to something with these small school guys. I think that's the difference in the NFL with the good scouting department teams. They can find these small school, they can hit on these small school guys, find traits that they like about him that and can kind of decipher how they're going to do against better competition. Because Broderick Martin, you did get to see him play against Auburn, and like the other guy they drafted, you do get to see him play against Power 5 competition. But it's just such a small sample size that, when you're playing like Western Kentucky, really isn't like they play their level of the FBS. They still play against some guys that, while they not play in the NFL, these were still Division I football players, guys that do have the size, kind of fit that mold. Even though they're not NFL guys, they do kind of fit the size profile as far as, and they do match the physicality some to a degree that guys in the NFL have. Obviously, what the conference Western Kentucky plays in does not match up to the NFL, but you kind of catch my drift here. But Broderick Martin, guy that's 6'5", over, I heard him listed 320 in the 330-ish area. A guy that's a good athlete, or at least a solid athlete, I would say, for a guy that size. A guy that can move lateral. A guy that does have the ability to rush the passer, can hold the point of attack, can win one-on-one. This guy I saw play, he's probably going to be like a zero tech over the nose tackle or over the center, but does have the ability to play like the one technique, like the shade nose, and even two tech. So I don't think he's just a true zero technique. I think this guy could play in the one and two techniques, like head up over the guard. So I think Martin does have some upside as far as with his athletic ability. So I think he could be a nice piece. Does have the ability to hold his ground versus double teams. So yeah, I think there's some upside with Broderick Martin, and it does fill a need, getting an interior defensive tackle. Round 5, pick 152nd overall. They took Colby Sorsdale, the offensive tackle out of William Mary. Sorsdale was a very nice surprise watching his tape. This is a guy that, like Broderick Martin, is a lot more athletic than I'd expect. And I watched the Virginia tape, and a lot of times Virginia wouldn't even send a rusher near his side. To me, that was a big signal that this guy's pretty good. If Virginia does not want to even try to rush off his side. So a lot of times he was looking for someone to block. And then I went and watched him play against an FCS school. There's a lot of times he was just like sustaining his block so long that just, his guy was not going to make the tackle. And a guy that has a good anchor too in pass protection, gets in his set very quick. I mean, this is a guy that has very good feet, very fluid football player, and a guy with not a lot of weakness. I guess, once again, like Broderick Martin, it's just going to be a pure projection. Do you have enough film and do you have enough evidence that you believe this guy, his skill set can translate in the NFL, and you believe he can hold anchor up against bigger, stronger defensive linemen in the National Football League will be the question for Colby Sorsdale. But really nice football player nonetheless. The 7th round, pick 219, they took Antoine Green, wide receiver, North Carolina. Antoine Green, interesting guy. Just played 9 games this past year, but man, he does have some big play ability down the field. A guy that runs 4.47 at 6'2", 199 pounds. So if you wouldn't know anything about Antoine Green just based off of those measurables, you would go into watching his tape probably with your eyebrows raised and really wondering, what's missing from this guy to make him fall to a 7th round. Well, there's a few things. Even though there's a lot to like about his game, he doesn't really play competitive. He's not as competitive as I necessarily want him to be. This is a guy that does he kind of goes, not full throttle for contested catches. Not that he's not trying, but I think he lacks, it's part of his competitiveness isn't there yet, and his play strength is just very adequate. So it's a combination of that, why he doesn't always win contested catches, and is not but he does have good run after catch ability, which was something I was surprised on. There was a play where he took a screen, broke several tackles, does have good contact balance, it does have pretty good hands, does have the ability to work back to the football, does not really can adjust to like lower thrown balls, but he doesn't. The problem I have is he gets too happy with just going down and diving for the ball instead of, his body. He's not really like as fluid or flexible in an athlete where he can just go down, catch the ball like lower in an athletic stance and then turn upfield. A lot of times I think he's going down low to get the ball because he has to, because he's not really flexible enough or able to bend at the waist and, with his leg strength to go down there and get the ball and stay upright and then turn upfield, if that makes sense. So a lot to like about Antoine Green. This is a guy that definitely should have been taken higher than 7th round. In Clemson, the Clemson game, I think, was telling, because if you watch the Clemson game early on, especially early on, I know things changed later in the game, but they put Nate Wiggins, the cornerback, Clemson's best corner, on him early in the game, which tells me Clemson thought that he was a more of a threat than Josh Downs, their other wide receiver. So that says a lot. Other teams, they do a lot of scouting on opponents, and if they wanted to put Nate Wiggins, Clemson's best corner, on him early in this game, they saw Antoine Green as a big threat. And you saw his big playability in the Notre Dame game. It's a guy that went over 100 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He did that multiple times, not only this year, but last year in 2021. You saw this guy with his speed can get past, the corner and safety in zone coverage. So Antoine Green, the way I started off talking about him, it doesn't sound like I was excited about him, but the more and more I watch him, the more and more I like this guy. But even though, despite some of the deficiencies I talked about. So the Philadelphia Eagles, another team with a draft I absolutely love. Howie Roseman killed this draft, starting with Jalen Carter the first night. That was an excellent pick. Getting the best player in the draft, always a great way to start out. Nolan Smith, they got 30th overall, edge rusher out of Georgia, really nice player. Great competitor, former 5-star, number 1 recruit out of high school. Continued to guy that didn't really play early on right at Georgia, but guy that's just when he really made the most of his opportunity. Hurt this past season, torn pectoral, but was a key, critical part of the 2021 national championship, and also early on in this season, or this past season's national championship. 65, they took Tyler Steen from Alabama. Tyler Steen, though, you got to love this is adding depth on the offensive line. Steen, a guy that can play guard, a guy that played tackle at Alabama, but projects better to a guard with shorter arms and not a super big overall dude. He's big, but he's not super tall, not super long. So projects better to a guard, but a guy that's an excellent pass blocker and run blocker. Just a good overall, all around offensive lineman. 66 back-to-back, they took Sidney Brown, safety out of Illinois. Sidney Brown, my number 1 safety, a guy that just looks the part, rocked up, nice, strong, muscular build, a guy that just was a monster playing in the box. He's a physical tackler who wants to just come up and just bring it, and does have some really good coverage ability, a guy that can cover well in the slot. He can play the deep half. Just a pretty fluid athlete too, and a guy that's going to add some help to the Eagles secondary. 105, they took Kelee Ringo, maybe the best pick of the 4th round, getting Kelee Ringo. They traded a next year's 3rd round to go get him. Kelee Ringo, one of the top athletes coming out of high school, excellent football player, a guy who was, like Nolan Smith and Carter, key piece to the last 2 national championships at Georgia. A guy that does have some tightness, does struggle with some change of direction, but as far as size, ability to turn and run, 4.36, he checks those boxes and may have a future playing safety later on in his career. 188, they took Tanner McKee, quarterback out of Stanford. Tanner McKee, not my favorite guy, but some people really like what Tanner McKee brings as far as a quarterback goes. As a guy that can complete passes, as far as is the short and then intermediate range passes, McKee is good at. It's a guy that does have pretty good pocket presence. Not the strongest arm, but the accuracy, like a touchdown from short and intermediate, is pretty good. a guy that's kind of tough to evaluate because the Stanford offense was pretty poor as a whole the last few years. But some people like him, some people not as high on him. I kind of fit the category not being as high on Tanner McKee, but we'll see what he does. I think he's a guy that could have a future in the NFL as being a solid backup. Maybe that's staying in Philadelphia and winning the backup job to Jalen Hurts. But we'll see how it goes for Tanner McKee. But the Eagles, really nice draft, getting Jalen Carter, Nolan Smith, Tyler Steen, Sidney Brown, Keely Ringo, and Tanner McKee as some of the more notable ones. Buffalo Bills, 25th overall. They got Dalton Kincaid, tight end out of Utah. My number one tight end, kind of the consensus number one tight end, him and Michael Mayer. But Kincaid really brings the pass-catching element. He's going to be a nice complement to Josh Allen. We'll see. Maybe year one, their connection gets on point early. But Dalton Kincaid, just an excellent football player. Started his career at San Diego State, transferred to Utah. Is a guy that can go up and get it. Like people said, he's like a receiver in a tight end's body. Excellent football player, solid blocker, even though that's not going to be his forte at the next level. But you had another weapon for Josh Allen, and it's always a plus for the Buffalo Bills. 59, they took Osiris Torrance, big guard out of Florida. Osiris Torrance, just a man when it comes to run blocking. It's a guy that's just hard to move, just a big physical presence, very good play strength, a guy that can do it all in the run game, man blocking, zone blocking. He can reach block. He can get to the second level and block linebackers in the open field. Torrance really checks all the boxes as far as what you're looking for an interior offensive lineman. Really, if you don't like this pick, then man, I don't know. Number 91, Dorian Williams. They took Dorian Williams, linebacker out of Tulane. Dorian Williams wasn't my favorite guy. I don't really like his ability to get off of blocks, but if you're talking about pure athleticism, coverage ability, and just relentless pursuit of ball carriers, that fits the mold for Dorian Williams. He's a guy who a lot of tackles in the Cotton Bowl against USC. This guy that does play hard, and a guy who plays a lot like Tremaine Edwards, who they recently lost at linebacker. So, guy that could fill in right away at linebacker for him, and a really nice, a really pretty solid football player, even though he wasn't one of my top linebackers. So the Green Bay Packers, interesting draft. They took 13th overall. They took Luke Van Ness, edge rusher out of Iowa. Van Ness, one of my favorite players. He was my number. Was he number 3 edge rusher for me? A guy who didn't start at Iowa, but when he did, power was the name of his game. Super strong dude, pretty good athlete. A guy who, when he was on the field for Iowa, it seems like he was making a big impact on this defense. So yeah, I like Luke Van Ness a lot. I like what he'll bring to the Packers. They could use another guy who is the versatility to play like defensive end, defensive tackle. A guy that can play, like the 2 through 6 technique. A guy that can stand up and rush from a 2-point stance, even rush as a wide 9 technique. That's probably not ideally what you want him to do, but he certainly can do that. And it's just a nice overall football player who the power is real with. 42nd overall, they took Luke Musgrave, tight end out of Oregon State. Musgrave is big. He's a big dude, 6'6", 6'7", a guy who might have been a higher-ranked tight end had he not gotten hurt this year. Played just a couple games this past season in 2022. Hasn't really played a lot of games overall in his career. But a guy that knows how to run routes, get open, not super dynamic after the catch, surprisingly, for how athletic he is and how good a speed he is. But this is a guy that a lot of teams are kind of saw some upside in him. Me, not as much, but even though I shouldn't say that. I see a little upside in Luke Musgrave, but he is with how little he played, he is a projection at the next level. But he's a guy that certainly looks the part and at times really did play the part. 50th overall, they took Jaden Reed, wide receiver from Michigan State. Jaden Reed, a guy I got to watch quite a bit. in his college career, being in the Big Ten area and being a Michigan fan. I watch Michigan State football quite often. Jayden Reed, a guy that super competitive, arguably probably the best player on the Michigan State football team the last couple of years. A guy that it sounds like his work ethic's very good, a guy that knows how to compete, knows how to get open. He's got pretty good speed. This is a guy that he can make adjustments to the football, that's for sure. He was really became the go-to wide receiver for Michigan State, and a guy that opposing defenses really had to key for Michigan State. So Jayden Reed, 50th overall. I'm not sure what kind of upside he has in the NFL, but I'm sure that the Green Bay is banking on him having fairly high upside, taking him 50th overall. So we'll see how Jayden Reed does for the Green Bay Packers, a team that, like this year, didn't take a first-round receiver, but Jayden Reed, a guy who may not be a wide receiver one, but can he be a good complement to Christian Watson, and who's Romeo Doubs and some of the other receiving talent they have this year. We'll see. 149, they took Sean Clifford, quarterback out of Penn State. Kind of a head-scratcher here, Sean Clifford. Some people thought might have went undrafted. This guy that had a pretty nice career at Penn State, but there's not really a lot of traits that jump off the tape with Sean Clifford. Excuse me. He's a guy who, you would say he was a winner. It seems like he played 12 years at Penn State. He was a guy that, this guy has a lot of experience as far as game-wise. You can't knock him in that department. But a guy who, it makes you wonder, is this a guy that'll even make the roster this year? Will he even challenge for the backup job to Jordan Love? Is a big question mark. This feels just kind of like a throwaway pick. No disrespect to Sean Clifford, but this guy, it doesn't seem like Clifford has an NFL future even as a backup, just because he's lacking as far as traits. But you can't knock the experience this guy has. Maybe he comes in and maybe his maturity, his experience level is enough to earn him a roster spot. And we'll see if he can. We'll see how he does, and I'm sure this guy will get action in preseason. We'll see how he does. They also took another tight end, Tucker Kraft. So, got to be honest, I did not watch his tape, but I think it's interesting they took two tight ends here. Tight end definitely was a need. They lost Robert Tonyan. He heads over to the Bears, so really filling a need. And these are both guys that people talked about. People didn't necessarily love either of these guys, but they kind of saw upside in both of them. So we'll see how they pan out. Las Vegas Raiders. Raiders had a really nice draft, in my opinion. Starts 7th overall with Tyree Wilson. Tyree Wilson, the edge rusher out of Texas Tech. Tyree Wilson, to me, I think will be a nice complement to Max Crosby. And Chandler Jones is getting a little bit older. If you watch Raiders games, Max Crosby always stands out. The dude's everywhere. Just a phenomenal football player. Plays his tail off. You add Tyree Wilson to the other side, and you got to feel like they're going to put a lot of pressure on opposing teams' offense, and they're gonna help improve. A Raiders defense has been pretty poor the past couple of years. So Tyree Wilson, I'm really excited about. Really excited to see how him and Crosby mesh together. They also took. I'll get to the second round pick in a moment, but they also took at 70th overall Byron Young from Alabama. In this pick, look, Byron Young, I don't think will ever be He's never going to be a notable standout guy for the Raiders, but what he does bring, bring ability to play with power, hold the point of attack, and just be a presence in the middle of the defensive line, something the Raiders are missing. And I think this pick will help boost Max Crosby and Tyree Wilson's play. Because if you watch Raiders games, I've said this in past videos, but if you watch Raiders games, they don't have a guy that is any sort of disruptive in the middle of the defense. Nichols, what's the other guy? Tillery. They do not get any sort of interior pressure, whether it's a run play or a pass play. So Byron Young is a guy that actually he can rush the passer. He's definitely not elite or good at. He's definitely not great at it by any means, but he can do it. and he's a physical presence, a guy that I think has really maxed his potential, being well coached at Alabama. So I think it'll be a pick that'll help boost Tyree Wilson and Max Crosby and help boost this defensive line overall. Number 35, they took Michael Mayer, tight end out of Notre Dame. Michael Mayer, whether he's not going to be Rob Gronkowski. He's not going to be that great, but Michael Mayer, just when it comes to, he can run block, he can block and he can catch, and he's good at both. So if you're good at both those things, high chance you're going to have success at the NFL. Michael Mayer fits that mold. Also size too. So if you check those three boxes in the NFL, size, ability to block, and ability to catch passes. Not only can he catch passes, he's good at catching in traffic too. So if you can do those four things, because it's hard to get separation at the tight end position in the NFL. So if you can do those four things, size, if you can block, you have size, you can make catches in traffic, and what was the other thing I mentioned? But if you can do those four things well, odds are you're going to have success in the NFL. And this is a pick that fills a need for the Las Vegas Raiders. So those are the three picks I just wanted to mention for the Raiders. I could talk of some more about, but those three picks alone, to me, really make the Raiders draft. Tyree Wilson, 7th overall, Michael Mayer, 35th overall, and then Byron Young, 70th overall. Seattle Seahawks, really nice draft. Devin Witherspoon started off at 5. Witherspoon, best corner in this draft, a guy that's a relentless competitor, gets after it, a ball hawk, good in man coverage, especially good in off-man coverage, a guy that just, he's going to bring a mentality, a competitiveness, a toughness to this Pete Carroll Seattle defense that will be exciting to watch. They said they're trying to bring back the Legion of Boom. I don't know. To me, that I don't really like saying let's try to duplicate something. That I don't know. Their secondary seems like a different secondary in a good way. Like it seems like it's more so about speed. Is it in like physicality and bullying you? Devin Witherspoon, that's the name. He is a feisty corner, but he's about speed and athleticism. Tyreek Woolen, their corner they took last year, he's about speed, athleticism. So obviously those guys can get feisty. Those guys can compete and challenge wide receivers. But to me, the Legion of Boom, it was a mix of, I guess it was a mix of speed and physicality, but it seems like they're going to kind of create their own identity, and it may be a little different from the Legion of Boom, but a new identity in a good way. So Witherspoon's a pick, 5th overall, a guy that some teams it sounded like had as the number 1 player on their board, and an excellent football player out of Illinois. Number 20th overall, they took Jackson Smith-Njigba. Smith-Njigba may be the best receiver in this draft. If he would have played this season and put up numbers similar to what he did last year, he probably would have been for sure the first receiver out the board. But it looks like at least Seattle, still NFL teams viewed him in a high in a good manner. So Jackson Smith-Njigba, the pick here, I think he's a good complement to DK Metcalf. I think this is a guy that will really help Geno Smith. He can work the middle of the field. He knows how to manipulate DBs and get open, and he can get open quickly. And even when he's covered, he can make catches. So, I think Geno Smith and him will have a good connection. Hopefully they get that connection down right away so you can see it early in the season, and he can be full go, and hopefully he's fully healthy. 37, they took my guy, Derek the Hall Monitor Hall. Derek Hall, a guy who is not going to wow you, but this is a guy who looks the part, built, rocked up dude. When teams run at him, there was a good chance he was going to make the tackle. It seemed like he definitely could hold the point of attack, didn't do it consistently, but good against the run, can rush the passer. A guy that when you watch Auburn's defense really stood out in a good way. Seemed like he was always around the ball. It seemed like at some point in every game he was going to make a play, even though he never really was the dominant edge rusher I thought he could become. It's certainly a guy who I think could be a solid starter in the NFL, and I think he really will fit in Seattle's, in Pete Carroll's culture well. Number 52, they took Zach Charbonnet, running back out of UCLA, transfer from Michigan. Zach Charbonnet, I think he'll fit in with Seattle well. This is a guy that makes violent jump cuts, a physical runner. You got to see him play in the Big Ten and the Pac-12. You got to see him play against SEC competition and Big Ten competition at Michigan. A guy who looks the part, plays the part, a guy who has experience, maybe quite a bit of carries, which may not be a good thing for running backs, but experience nonetheless. A guy who doesn't have blazing speed, but he has good speed and he plays fast, and he makes his quick, efficient cuts and his vision do help try to make up for his lack of long speed, even though he can break some longer runs, even though he's not going to be a guy who's going to hit home, be like 60, 70-plus yard touchdown runs consistently. He's a guy that I think will have some 30, 40 yard runs where he maybe breaks a tackle or two. I think that'll be Zach Charbonnet's game, and a guy that can run between the tackles with power. 154, they took Oluwatimi from Michigan. Oluwatimi won the Remington Award last year as the best center in college football, and then this past year at Michigan in 2022 had a phenomenal year. Was a part of the best offensive line in college football. The Joe Moorhead winner, Oluwatimi. Didn't really dive into his tape super closely, but did watch him. Obviously, watched him play at Michigan this past season, and really no one got by him. And he did a really good job as a run blocker and a pass blocker. Tennessee Titans with a nice draft, number 11th overall. They took Peter Skoronski. Skoronski really makes sense from a schematics perspective. It's a team that loves to run the ball. Skoronski is a guy that could excel at the guard position. He's an excellent run blocker. He knows how to put himself into position, put himself in a good athletic position to execute a really good run block. A guy that just gets it, and a guy that just looked pro ready these last couple years at Northwestern, and I think will be a really nice fit with the Titans. Maybe is not the biggest guy for a tackle, but like I said, projects better to a guard. And if they need him to play tackle, he certainly can do it. But you got to believe that his highest level of play will be at the guard position, and it'll be fun to see him run blocking for Derrick Henry and the Tennessee Titans. 33, they took Will Levis, quarterback out of Kentucky. Will Levis, got an excellent arm. The guy that had a great 2021 season. The question remains: was that 2021 season a fluke? And then was this down year in 2022 going to be a continuous trend? Can he kind of improve some of his mechanics, become more of a consistent passer at the next level? Remains a question. Is he too bulky? Does he play too much Carson Wentz-like, just reckless and is going to get injured? Dealt with some injuries this past season as well. So question mark there. Also, they took Tajay Spears, running back out of Tulane. I like 147. They took Josh Wiley, a tight end out of Cincinnati. A guy that knows how to get open, a guy that can block, a guy that's used in motion out of the backfield. Just a good all-around tight end who had a nice career at Cincinnati. I think Tennessee should know how to use him well. It's a team that does favor the tight end position. So Josh Wiley out of Cincinnati, the pick at 147. Cincinnati Bengals, another team where I like most of their picks, but a couple of their picks, one of their early picks I questioned. So 28th overall, they took Miles Murphy, defensive end out of Clemson. I don't love Miles Murphy. I think he's a guy that does have some upside, but I think you really have to try to get him to play consistent. And it doesn't always play super strong despite showing good strength at times. So we'll see how Miles Murphy will be an interesting guy to watch in the next level. 60th overall, they took DJ Turner, corner out of Michigan. Underrated corner who has excellent 4.2 speed. 163, they took Chase Brown, running back out of Illinois. Chase Brown, one of my favorite running backs in this draft. A guy who had an excellent 2022 season. was one of the top rushers in all of college football, just a phenomenal football player. Brother Sidney Brown, the safety that was drafted by the Eagles. Him and his brother really dominant at Illinois, and Brown will look to be dominant for the Bengals. Maybe challenged to become that backup for Joe Mixon this year. And I think he's got a bright future in the NFL at running back. 95, they took Jordan Battle. Battle's a guy that lacks some traits athletically. Not the fastest guy, not the best acceleration and short area burst, but he's a guy that's played a lot of football for Alabama at safety. A guy that will come up and make tackles. A guy that knows kind of what you see is what you're going to get with Jordan Battle. I don't think there's a lot more room for growth. I think Alabama has kind of got the most out of him as far as his skill set's concerned. But, he's a guy that will add some depth to the Bengals secondary and will be a nice fill-in player if someone were to get hurt. So just wanted to touch on that. Thanks for tuning in to Big Time Football Talk. Make sure to stay tuned for more episodes and clips from the show. Till next time, peace.